Nurses have a role to address racial inequality. We are fighting two viruses, COVID-19 that has impacted the African American community and the virus of racism. The recent lynching and killing of Mr. George Floyd on May 25, 2020 have impacted the world. The recent killing this year of Mr. Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Rayshard Brooks, in the last decade, Trayvon Martin, Eric Gardner, Tamir Rice, Sandra Bland, and recently stories have been coming up, Mr. Elijah McClain, and many, many others. There is a physiological and psychological impact that will occur on these families, the Black America as well as Black children. So how do we as a people care for ourselves during this time? Racism and your health. Welcome to Nurse Inform. This is part one of a two-part series. Hello, welcome to Nurse Inform. My name is Michelle George, and I'm an advanced practice registered nurse, and I want to talk to you about a critical subject, racism and how it impacts the health of African Americans. Recently, we've seen recent events of the shooting of unarmed Black males and Black females as well, and inequality. And so I want to talk about how can we stay healthy in this time. We recently saw the lynching of George Floyd on May the 25th when that officer put his knee on his neck and he was crying out for just asking, I can't breathe, just like in Eric Gardner a few years ago. So as a nurse, I know that as African Americans, we experience inequality and not having that access to care, but I want to talk about a critical subject so we can take care of our health during this time and continue to fight the injustices that plague our community. So I'm going to go over this PowerPoint to talk about racism in your health and solutions and things that we can do. This is a part one of a two-part series that I'm going to talk about. And even though I don't have all of the answers, but if we put a comprehensive plan together, we can win this fight. We've seen the injustices of our people throughout history as we landed, and the slaves landed in Jamestown, Virginia in 1619. Or maybe even before, from all continents across the world. So as we go through this PowerPoint, take a journey with me about racism in our health and how we can protect our health as we fight, again, this injustice. Racism. I put a slide up here. Racism basically is the belief that one race thinks they're more superior than others. And as we see with structural racism can impact the government. We see it through housing. We see it through the criminal justice system. We also see it through education, social services, and mental health. And as we experience this as African Americans, most African Americans, I could say all of us live through almost oppression every day, where when we walk in stores or we walk in school, the first thing people see is our color. We know as nurses that racism is a public health crisis. And as we go through this slide, what I would like for you to take care of our health during this time. Even myself, one of the reasons I'm doing this video, because when I saw the video of George Floyd, I was myself experiencing headaches, but fighting in the civil rights groups that I belong to, been fighting police brutality, but just actually to see an actual lynching on TV had very profound impact physically on my health. I'm showing this slide because 400 years ago, the first slaves landed in Jamestown, Virginia in 1619.
To me, that was so dear. I'm standing here, I'm standing right here on the banks of Jordan. Yes, I am. I've got to see.
400 years ago, the first slaves landed in Jamestown, Virginia in 1619. And last year, there was not so much a celebration, it was a commemoration of how we've gone through the 400 years of oppression. There have been changes throughout history, but there's still a lot of change that needs to happen within society. I'm taking you down a journey in our history. African Americans, there was a law called the Black Codes, which was passed in southern states in the United States after the American Civil War with the intent and the effect of restricting African Americans' freedom and compelling them to work in labor economy and low wages. And as you will see as we go on this journey, you will be reminded that some of the injustices that we're still experiencing today. I'm taking you down a journey. There was a court case in 1896 called Plessy versus Ferguson. It was a landmark decision of the United States Supreme Court that upheld constitutionality of racial segregation laws for public facilities and long as segregated facilities were equal in quality. A doctrine that came to be known as separate but equal. This decision legitimized the many state laws reestablishing racial segregation. We have to remember African Americans contributed. They served in the war in 1800s, the Reconstruction period, 1863 to 1877, where African Americans had businesses. They served in elected offices. African Americans were very progressive in this era at the time. We see pictures of, as Malcolm X, Dr. King, Mary McLeod Bethune, and we see as we continue to fight, one of the things that I believe that could help us in this fight in racism, how did the African Americans before us, Harriet Tubman, they didn't even have a lot of laws and policies at the time, but she was still able to free so many slaves. African Americans were in government. African American voters played an important role in Reconstruction, contributing to the Republican victories in the South. In South Carolina, African Americans held a majority in the lower house of the legislature. How many people remember Ida B. Wells? In the 1890s, Ida B. Wells, she documented the lynching in the United States through her indictment called Southern Horrors, where they had lynching laws in all phases, investigating frequent claims of whites that lynched Black Americans. Ida B. Wells exposed the lynching and the barbaric practices of whites in the South. But as we will see, the new lynching is the shooting of unarmed African Americans. Racism and our health, as we see the lynching of Black men and Black women in America, that was then, but this is now, and it's the shooting of unarmed African Americans. We see recently Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, just a few weeks and months apart, and then we had George Floyd, and recently we had Rayshard Brooks that was killed in Atlanta, shot in the back, just like similar to Walter Scott a few years ago in 2015. And if you remember that time, that officer was able to be sentenced to 20 years in prison, but 3 months later, Dylan Roof shot 9 congregants in Mother Emanuel, which I believe was a backlash after the killing of Walter Scott. Also, Dr. King talked about we may all come in different ships, but we're all in the same boat now. And we have to remember that the fight is still continuous. It's a spiritual warfare, and I know Reverend Sharpton really touched on that at the funeral. We're not just fighting flesh and blood, but we're fighting higher principalities that the Bible talks about in Ephesians 6. We see Nelson Mandela talking about no one is born hating. Hate is taught, and we have to remember that. Racism and our health. Malcolm X talked about that's not a chip on my shoulder, that's your foot on my neck. And what similarities do we see today when, as African Americans, we cannot breathe because of the oppression that has still continued to plague our society? Back in the 60s, 50s, and 60s, the Jim Crow laws were enforced in 1965. Jim Crow laws mandated racial segregation in public facilities, where you had white and colored. My parents were from Montgomery, Alabama, and my mother used to show me that she could not drink from the water fountain of whites. The Jim Crow laws, boy, we come a long way. Restrooms, white, colored. And as we remember, at that time, so many African Americans lost their lives through lynching, trying to get the right to vote during that time. And in the African American community, African Americans, research shows that we have very high cortisol levels due to the stress that we experience mostly every day through oppression, feeling that we're not worth. Some African Americans feel that they're not worth because a lot of times they see color, we see discrimination where African Americans have gone to medical school and experienced. Right here in this slide, I wanted to talk about when our cortisol levels are high, there's an increased risk of heart disease, high blood pressure, high blood sugar, and we see diabetes impacting our community, digestive issues, nerve problems, and anxiety and depression.
Equal justice, equal fairness. We're not anti anybody. We are trying to stop people from being anti us. We want the law to apply equally.
And you don't need a whole lot of studying about that. Yes, we need new laws. Yes, the Congress has stepped up. The Congressional Black Caucus has come. Yes, we need to close these no-knock laws. Yes, we need to stop where policemen can just say based on what they fought, they can use lethal force. Yes, we need residency requirement. All of what they propose is what we need. But we have enough right now to prosecute policemen that hold somebody down 8 minutes and 46 seconds.
So what are some of the ways we can do to reduce our stress? Well, first of all, remove uncertainty. How is it similar to what you have done before? What are things that we can do as a community that we can do to protect our health? Being proactive, what can you do to improve the situation? If you belong to a church, reach out to your pastor about having dialogue during this time of stress. Reframing viewing the task as an opportunity, not a threat. Best case scenario, get a good night's sleep, but also talk to someone. But also during this time, you may have to seek out mental health counselors to help you during this time. Reverend Charles Williams, if we can remember, Reverend Charles Williams, who is pastor of the historic King Solomon Baptist Church, spoke out against emergency management in Detroit, as well as the Reverend David Bullock and others. They fought against that emergency management, even though we still left with some of the dangers and the tentacles of emergency management. In the city of Detroit, we have really not been lifted out of bankruptcy, and I say that because we still have a financial review commission that tells us how to spend our money.
One, we want federal intervention. Two, we want to continue to send the message that we believe that emergency management is anti-democratic and it is an attack on our voting rights. And so we're standing here today to say that we're going to stand up and we're going to stand out until our change comes in Detroit.
So we continue to fight. Reverend Williams is also the president of the National Action Network, the Michigan chapter. When we look at racism in your health, we have to continue to pray for the leaders that are in the social justice. Reverend Sharpton, who is a civil rights activist, a preacher, but also the founder and the CEO of National Action Network. We have to continue to pray for Reverend Sharpton because he have done so many funerals of shootings of unarmed African Americans in the last few years. And if you saw the preaching that he did for George Floyd, very, very impactful, just to continue to encourage us, but also letting us know what the Bible says, we're fighting a different force, which is an evil force. So I know every year, the New York chapter, National Action Network, they host a convention every year in April. And one of the panels talk about police brutality. And I usually attend the conventions every year. And every year, it seems like when we go year after year, there's always more shootings added to that. But also during that convention, it's not just a convention there to convene, we're also there to fight policy and see and bring strategies back to our community to fight the injustice. We have to remember that we're fighting a spiritual warfare when it comes to the injustice. The scriptures talk about in Ephesians 5, be very careful how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, because making most of every opportunity because the days are evil. So we have to take every opportunity we can to fight injustice. And we realize in Ephesians 6 talk about our struggles are not against flesh and blood, but against rulers, against authorities, against the powers of the dark world. In other words, demonic forces. But the Bible talks about Satan knows his time is short in the book of Revelation. Psalms talk about that one day God has set a time to judge the wicked evilness of this world. So as I close during this time, I just want to encourage you to continue to fight in the fight. If you need to see your physician, take care of your health. Make sure you get your blood pressure checked during this time. I know we're in a time of injustice. I would like to thank Dr. Needham. My theme song of Nurse Inform is a song that was arranged by Dr. Needham, Wings of a Dove. And I would like to thank you, Dr. Needham, for that. I also would like to thank the Bishop Rance Allen for allowing me to take the segment of I Stood on the Banks of Jordan that he sung in 2015. And in 2012, in 2015, he was at the White House at the time President Obama was the president. So thank you, Bishop Allen, and thank you, Dr. Needham, for allowing me during this time, because I think as African Americans, it just seems like we're on the shores of Jordan as we watch so many shooting on our African Americans go by with so much pain in our hearts. So thank you very much for tuning into Nurse Informed.
Please, please, don't leave me down here. You can't got my father, then you turn around and you got my mother. Oh, you took everything to me that was so dear.